Everyone. I'm privileged to present you the study data of our European MCL network. In fact, that was challenging the current standard of care in younger patients, which is autologous transplant plus cytarabine containing induction. So just as some kind of feedback, ground, so this is the disease we're talking about, mantle cell lymphoma, with an incidence of about 1 in 100,000. A challenging lymphoma. Why is that? Because it can have a rather indolent course shown on the left side. This is what we call the conventional or classical mantle cell lymphoma, either leukemic or nodal. Or it could show a rather aggressive clinical course, and that's based on biological risk factors like blastoid cytomorphology, high Ki67, and specifically P53 alteration. Concerning the current standard of care, this is shown on the left side. This is a study we initiated 25 years ago, which finally, and that is the only randomized trial, confirms the overall survival benefit of autologous transplant, almost doubling from 5 to 10 years. However, we meanwhile have improved our first-line treatment. In relapse, and this is another data set specifically in the early relapses, so patient which may indicate some chemorefractoriness, patients who were salvaged with targeted treatment, essentially Ibrutinib, do achieve a significantly better overall survival. So that was the starting point of our study, implementing this approach into first-line treatment. And that is our triangle trial with 3 arms. You know, this is Europe. We could not conclude on one question. And so essentially it incorporates 3 different comparisons. Patient inclusion criteria were younger patient qualifying for dose-intensified treatments, previously untreated, and as mentioned in a suitable performance status. And they received either the current standard of care, cytarabine induction followed by autologous transplant, or in the add-on arm, Ibrutinib was added to the R-CHOP, as well a fixed time maintenance of 2 years. And then the most interesting arm is the I-arm, which is somewhat a head-to-head comparison, essentially skipping autologous transplant and instead of that adding Ibrutinib. During the run of the trial, it became obvious that our maintenance does improve PFS and overall survival, so accordingly it was added to all 3 study arms, and essentially 58, 54, and 57 patients did receive rituximab maintenance based on clinical routine and national guidelines. So this is the first comparison, the add-on design, so autologous transplant only versus the addition of Ibrutinib. And what you can see, our primary study aim was freedom of failure survival, which is pretty much like PFS, but on top of that, non-response to the first-line treatment, but that was only 1-digit patient numbers. Overall, you see there is a significant improvement of disease freedom at 3 years, plus 16%, and that corresponds to a hazard ratio of 0.5, and this is highly significant. Oops. Let me get. That is the second comparison, which is the head-to-head comparison, so autologous transplant versus Ibrutinib. And formally, I have to explain that our background was autologous transplant is only justified because of its higher toxicity if there's a significant improvement of FFS. Well, this hypothesis was rejected. In fact, the blue curve is the autologous transplant curve, and the green curve is the Ibrutinib arm. And again, there was a numerical benefit of 14%, and I should also add that this is not because the autologous transplant arm performed worse than in previous trials. We almost have the identical outcome in our previous trial. And finally, the third question, if we add Ibrutinib to the multimodal concept, does autologous transplant add anything? And these are early days. We can't conclude so far. That is the statistical correct description. However, you see these curves are totally overlapping so far. Finally, how were these patients being salvaged? And this is shown here. So far, the numbers are rather small, so I want to caution you. But anyway, about 80% of the patients in the control arm were salvaged with the BTKi, in contrast to the Ibrutinib-containing arms, with only 20% being salvaged. So to conclude, and I'm sorry I could not show you all data, definitely the add-on is superior to autologous transplant only, based on FFS. And as mentioned, similar data we had for PFS. The statistical correct comment is that autologous transplant is not superior to Ibrutinib, but you have seen the curves. Essentially, you have a numerical benefit of 14% after 3 years in favor of Ibrutinib. And what about the third comparison? There's no decision yet. However, you have seen the curves are overlapping, and the data I could not show is that autologous transplant buys in significant toxicity. So for the time being, this study favors the Ibrutinib-only arm. And based on a better tolerability, that also results in a numerical overall survival benefit of 5% of both experimental arms over the old standard autologous transplant. I'm not allowed to provide any significance data so far. And with that, I would like to conclude. We established autologous transplant 20 years ago, and in my opinion, now the better is the enemy of the good one. We have to move on. And of course, I would like to thank all the people who are involved in this study. This was an academic trial, supported financially by Janssen, but fully independently performed, and that takes a lot of activities, putting that all together, 14 countries been participating. I emphasize that because I'm also the coordinator of the initiative against bureaucracy in clinical trials. Thank you.